chin. Cinch it up 6 o'clock on your line. And again.
Okay, one more thing we'll try.
Okay.
I don't know if these actually wrap from here. You ready? I do 4 rapid fire.
Yeah, ready when you
Bang bang. Okay, well this is just a quick little video that I'm doing, or I might attach it to a video, but essentially it's my 338 all set up with all the bits and pieces. I've actually, I think I mentioned last time on a video before that I rebuilt the base of this, rebuilt this whole stock and put a different slide in here which works really nicely on this bag, cycling on this bag. But also been through, I put in this little brace in here to actually make it a bit more like a chassis gun, so there's S-flex in it. But I realised also one of the last modifications I did with the custom made muzzle brake I'd gone too far. So I've simplified. I built a new brake. This is all CNC'd. It's a new brake. It's essentially built with a fairly simple design without too much trying to push it around. What I'd done is I built some chamfers in that had gone too far, and I could see that in the shot there was a push down actually happening as it fired. So I've actually designed this brake fairly simplistically. It's just got a nice big flowing for the actual brake part of it, and then there's some little reliefs up the top here just to put a tiny bit of down pressure to help the gun cycle as flat as I can make it happen without trying to push it around too much. What I'd actually found, I'd overcompensated for muzzle rise, and what that had given me was essentially a movement that meant that unless I held the gun just right, and don't get me wrong, it would still shoot super accurately, but it put more force or more emphasis on how I exactly shouldered up to the gun. If I got it different, I was seeing about a half MOA change in my shots out of that design. So I've simplified it, neatened it off, and I like building this sort of stuff, so it was just something different that I did to try on this one. But happy with it. The base is working properly. This is actually set up so it's on a proper 60 MOA, is I've got this cold shot set on, and then that gives me the full 120 minutes of adjustment out of the beast. And everything apart from, I just got to tweak that a tiny bit. I just had, actually I've forgotten where I ended up. Yeah, half MOA. I've got to adjust on my right to give that a true center, but that shot really well. You know, we're in a bullet touching 5-shot group, so I was pretty happy with that. Anyway, that's just a quick look at that.
it's actually pretty well 11 o'clock in our position now. Completely 11 o'clock.
Okay, I see the stick.
See the stick? Yeah.
Let's just see where we go. Like, I go up there.
Side, yeah.
Okay, so I'll go to 3.
Right.
I'll go to there. Didn't see it?
No, I didn't see it.
I'll eat that fucking log.
No, I wonder.
Okay, go to 2.5.
Right.
Go to there.
Just to the right.
Yeah, about a little tiny bit long, wasn't it?
A little tiny bit long and just to the right, yeah.
Ooh.
Ooh. Coming in very slowly. Ooh, didn't see. I wanted to hit that log.
Yeah.
To the
Ooh. Good length.
Yeah, yeah, very good. Oh, geez, that was close.
Oh, it'd be what you call it here.
Ooh, damn, that was close. That's about spot on. Awesome. Oh, you're right on the money there, mate. Just around it by the looks.
Oh,
Don't
that's
forget
just. See what I'm talking about?
Yeah. How are you going?
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, you saw it?
Yep.
Just do the same thing, do the same thing.
Okay.
Make sure on the fourth one across. Oh, that was a lot better. That was within a foot of it.
Yeah, what's in it?
All the same rules. You've got to get all stable. Just squeeze your trigger.
Here we go.
Got it.
Close
Well,
to,
it looked
wasn't
like got it. Maybe it was a tiny bit long, but it looked like it was smack on it.
Yeah. Oh, now I've got to get there again.
That was just to the right of it.
Yeah, it was, isn't it?
G'day everyone. Today we're just doing a little bit of wintertime fun, just having a little bit of a play. We've got this is our little CZ 22. It's a, what is it again? It's a 452 CZ, and this is a 22 that we've had in a basic stock. It's actually turned into this little crazy looking monstrosity, which is, we actually use this one for hunting or for pest control at home. So this one runs a little night sight and things so that we can actually see. And I've got it's a very cheap but an adjustable scope to be able to range. It runs subsonic sonic ammo, and we shoot it out to sort of 140 yards. So you've got to range very thoroughly using the night sight. It's pretty tricky. So yeah, I've got a bit of a stock and things so we can do that to get rid of rabbits, essentially, around rabbits and foxes that come in around the home property. But anyway, that's why it looks like this. Because it's got a tactical scope on it, it means we can adjust it. I've also got one of these bases which you get. It's a what's the company? It's an FX no limit scope, which means you can tilt the scope up and get more adjustment MOA on it. So I actually set this up to where running around what I figured out I needed was around the 140 MOA. Approximately 140 MOA it was going to be to shoot the 720 yards of a site that I knew about over here. Now it is winter time, there's a crop growing, so we're standing at the paddock. It is very hard to see, so shooting into water makes it nice and easy. So that's what we've actually done, and it worked pretty easily. I brought out 100 rounds of the CZ, of the Velociter CCI ammunition, thinking it's going to be really hard to hit, but we found we're only 3 shots and we're getting into the dam, and as you'll see on the footage there, it worked pretty easily. It was actually pretty easy to get on there. There's a bit of a breeze, but pretty impressive. Over 700 yards with a 22. I wouldn't have thought it was. Another thing I wanted to show today, we're just out shooting with that 22, and we're using a second focal plane scope. And generally, for the extreme long range stuff, I use a second focal plane scope. Now, I wanted to explain a little bit as to the thing to have for tactical matches and for long range in most forums and places is essentially a first focal plane. That's the scope you want to have. Listen, it isn't really that way. They're a great scope. I would tell you that the advantage of a first focal plane, the only real advantage, they're good quality scopes, but the real advantage is you can range your distances with your scope. Now, saying that doesn't make it automatically happen by any means. It means that if you know the exact size of your target and you have the maths to be able to turn that properly into a distance, then a first focal plane is a lot easier to use, because essentially your reticle never changes, or sorry, it always stays in reference to your zoom. Now, like, trying to explain that, I've drawn some little drawings here and try and explain what that means. That means essentially when you are zoomed in, so you're fully zoomed in, you'll have a reticle like this. Let's say it's a reticle that fills the full screen. You have your MOAs down here, or your mils, whatever they are, but you have a reticle that fills up the scope. When you zoom back out, so let's say that's in at full 25 power. If you took this scope, if it was first focal plane, you took this scope and you zoomed it back to 6 power, then your reticle will look like that. It's a small reticle, so it comes back to small. Generally what you'll find is they'll have triangles or little thick lines out here. When you zoom it back, you'll have thick lines through this part, so you have a big thick line there and a big thick line here, and you have your little reticle in the center. So what that means is that zoomed out, you still have a nice center point and you can still dial it in nicely on a center point, but you don't have essentially this part of the scope you can't use as well. Now, what I'm actually talking about, to make sense of what I'm actually talking about, if we go across to another couple of circles over here in the way of what I would reference as a second focal plane scope, essentially is you have your big reticle across the middle of it. But let's say this one's zoomed right in at 25 power, and here's a house you're looking at. That's how big the house is to your scope. If you zoom out, you have, and let's go back down to 6 power, your reticle looks exactly the same. All of a sudden your house looks like this. It's a little tiny house. Now, how's that an advantage? Well, this is how it's an advantage. When you're shooting extreme long range and you've gone past your the minutes of angle, or the mils of angle that you can actually adjust in your scope, so you've gone past your internal adjustments. So let's say you've got a scope with an average scope around 80 minutes of angle, and you've maxed it out, and you actually you've done your range calculation, and you need 140 minutes of angle. Well, in a first focal plane scope, you can't do that. Essentially, you can't work out your holdover because you've got nothing accurate to hold over it with. What you can do with a second focal plane scope is you can zoom right out to 6 power, and then you still have your big reticle lines here. You still have your big lines. So then you can work out, and I generally would do this, either you can do it by trial and error. How I would normally do it is I know I've got we shoot at a 24-inch target, but let's say you've got a 6-foot high target, and then you are zoomed right out at 6 power, and you know that essentially that is 6 feet. This little stick here standing up this tall is 6 feet tall. You then can work out essentially via your range, and this is you have already ranged your target. You know that you're shooting, let's say 2,000 yards, then you know that X amount of minutes is involved in that 6-foot target. You can then work out exactly where you're going to hold, and that might be right down at the base here, where you're actually holding for your target to give yourself the 140 minutes of angle. And because you've got a second focal plane, you can zoom back. So it's the opposite of what you'd think, but you zoom out to end up where you've got more scope to use, and then you can accurately use holdover. I have done that for a 3,000 yard target where I've zoomed back out to, I think I zoomed back out to 8 power to be able to get it held in when I had a scope that only had 120 minutes of angle, and I wanted, I've forgotten exactly my numbers, but I think it was around the 150 or 160 minutes of angle. By zooming back, made it a little bit harder to look at, but then I can use my scope to do that. If you go back to a first focal plane, you really can't do it. The advantage with the first focal plane, if you're shooting inside the minutes of angle you've already got, then like I said, you can shoot, you can use your center point, you're not using holdover in those places, you use your center point, and you can actually range with it. So keep in mind, if you're ranging, it means you know the size of your target. And to be honest, in extreme long range shooting, I haven't found it very relevant. If you are essentially 10 yards out on your range, so you're shooting 2,500 yards and you're 10 yards out, it's a big miss. You've missed. You might be in the ballpark and you can get a call on it, but in actual trying to get your range, if you're trying to range it exactly, it really, yeah, that's what you use a laser finder or you use GPS or you use that sort of stuff for. But come back down inside really the supersonic range, and you're doing where you want to be able to range yourself in, whether it's matches or you're just doing that sort of stuff where you want to be able to range properly, you know the size of your target, then your first focal plane scope has a real advantage. That's just a mud map as to trying to make sense of it in some form or other. For most of my stuff, most of my rifles have second focal plane because I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to zoom out and then shoot at extreme ranges, past things, 2,000 yards, 2,500 yards, 1,800 yards with the 223, that sort of stuff. And I do it with a second focal plane, zoomed back, so I can give myself enough holdover, combined with all my internal adjustment to be able to pull the shot off. Anyway, that's just my take on what scope I use for extreme long range shooting.